I think in a lot of different ways. It's not that there is an answer where I could say, oh yeah, if you just understand the Qing, you get this. As recently as, say, 10 or 12 years ago, when the boom, of course, had already been going on for a while, but when it was still to a great extent a boom that was based on rural industry, the connections to the Qing seemed more obvious. Now that the so-called township and village enterprises, for the most part, have been superseded, and you're getting an urbanization process that looks much more familiar to those of us who were trained in the West. Some of those resemblances now seem less important. On the other hand, one of the things certainly that looking back at the Qing gets you, I think, is a pretty profound sense of how a system that looks quite centralized on paper is often very, very decentralized in practice, which I think is still true in many ways of the PRC. Obviously, there's a very strong central state that can do certain things that are almost unimaginable elsewhere. One thinks of the compulsory birth control program and the way in which they were able to, for better or worse, get to the grassroots and impose this thing. But the price Beijing pays is usually that they can have a few priorities, they can make everybody toe the line on those priorities, and the price they pay for that is they have to look the other way on a whole bunch of other things, which I think is a very hard thing for a lot of Westerners to get their heads around, because we're so used to the idea that, well, this is an illiberal society, therefore it's a highly centralized society. In fact, there are a lot of ways to be illiberal, and not all of them are highly centralized. I also think that part of what seeing the very long run does, and only time will tell how important this is it really does bring some of the resource questions and therefore some of the environmental questions into focus in a different way. Obviously, all you have to do is look at photos of the air in Beijing to know that there are environmental questions. You don't have to be a historian for that. But I think there are things about, among other things, the ways in which rural and urban growth and rural industrial and agricultural growth have been intertwined for a very long time that help you understand some of the particular ways that China's environmental issues manifest themselves. I think there are things about the relationships between regions and the ways in which, for a very, very long time, one of the roles that the central government has played is trying to prop up some of the more environmentally fragile regions, which it has done to varying degrees by taking resources from some of the more prosperous regions. And that's a very different kind of political economy of development than what we're used to from most of the rest of the world. And it still matters. So it matters in things like the current Develop the West program. It matters in the ways that the regime is approaching water shortages and the crisis of agriculture on the North China Plain, which with 6% or something of the with about 15% of the per capita water supply of the country as a whole, which means something more like 6% of the global per capita water supply, is nonetheless one of the country's key breadbaskets. There are important historical reasons for that, and they lead to a very particular set of environmental dilemmas. I think one of the other things that comes out of the Chinese experience that obviously is getting less and less relevant with time, but still really matters, is this is a place where, until very, very recently, a very large percentage of the possibility had more or less guaranteed access to subsistence. And it's a place where, if you look at if you were to graph the degree of economic development versus the percentage of the society that consisted of employees at will, it's a remarkably strange relationship, which again has had, I think, both positive effects in enabling a certain kind of social stability through otherwise very, very wrenching transformations, and it's also had a lot of costs that they're now dealing with now. So all those things, I think, they're all part of the story.